boss had this dream. He used to say, I'd like to build a boat to go up rivers.
Bill Hamilton never claimed he invented the water jet. But clearly, the boss demonstrated that shallow water should not stop anyone from boating it. In doing so, he effectively created a market for water jet propulsion.
Many people had tried. None of them had reached any commercial success.
But Bill Hamilton's natural tenaciousness and passion single-mindedly drove the early development of the water jet.
The story goes, camping by the Waitaki, my father said to my mother, lovely place, but there's nothing much to do here. We need a boat to run upstream. For all I know, it could have been right here at Irishman Creek.
Bill Hamilton's thoughts of an alternative way to boat upstream stem back to the early 1950s, and possibly even earlier. His heavy engineering business was pretty much looking after itself. CWF Hamilton & Co. had opened up a Christchurch factory where the bulk of their machinery manufacture was being handled. Now was his time to settle back and enjoy life at Irishman Creek, where it all began. But Charles William Fielden Hamilton was not an idle man. In fact, at a time when others were contemplating retirement, Bill simply entered the next phase of his life, letting his inventive mind take him off in a new direction. Or perhaps not so new.
He was up in Christchurch for a short time. He told me he's going back to Irishman Creek and tried to get himself a boat which would run up through the rivers.
The young Hamilton grew up at Ashwick Station in South Canterbury. Remoteness of the high country sheep station was quite possibly the catalyst for his sharp, resourceful mind.
Just so much on his own that he became very, very self-reliant. If anything had to be done, he would look around, see how he could do it, and he became so competent at building up machines or gadgets. Some worked, some didn't, but he'd always do it.
At 21, he bought Irishman Creek Station, not far away. It was the early 20s. There were none of the mighty power schemes of today, and the waters of the Oho, Tekapo and Waitaki ran unchallenged from the mountains to the sea.
He built little bits of machinery, built a dam, put in a water wheel. He had the water wheel driving a lathe for himself. And there are lots of things he did before getting a sheep station up in the Mackenzie country.
But he actually thought things out very well. He did build the overhead loaders and the arseless wonder and lots of things.
But building machinery to meet the demands of the people who looked to his ingenuity for help, Hamilton needed power. So like many challenges in his life, this became his primary focus. By diverting part of Irishman Creek and building a hydro generator from specially imported parts, it wasn't long before Bill had his own electricity flowing through the farm homestead and factory. Over the next 40 years, CWF Hamilton & Co. designed and built countless machines, including excavators and hydraulic pumps. He even designed and built his own ice scraper for the dam at Irishman Creek. He was contracted to build countless large industrial projects, including New Zealand's first ski tow and pen stocks for the Tekapo B power scheme. By the early 50s, the boss, as he became known, was spending more and more time back at Irishman, pottering round with the things he enjoyed most.
In the evenings he'd sit in his old leather chair, think about it, perhaps sketch out what he was going to do the next day on the back of an envelope. And then he would go out and build just such a range of gadgets. So I was quite used to it. When he said he wanted to run up through the rivers, you know, I thought that was, well, I didn't think very much at all. It's just another thing which Father is doing.
Set in the foothills of the Southern Alps of the South Island, Irishman Creek lies in the shadow of New Zealand's highest peak, Mount Cook. The alpine landscape of the Mackenzie country make it a natural basin for the millions of litres of water pouring off the snow-capped mountain peaks.
My father used to tell me how he would float down rivers in a canoe as a boy and then have to carry the canoe all the way upstream to do it again. In later life, with an inventive mind and living in the Mackenzie country, where the rivers are shallow, he decided he must build himself a boat to do exactly that, run upstream.
Early attempts weren't focused on jet propulsion, rather anything that would allow a boat to make its way across shallow water and, most importantly, upstream.
My father had heard of tunnel boats, and that was his first experiment. Arnold France built a boat based on the Heckman sea sled, a reverse V. And in this he put a propeller, and that when it got planing, air would come in and destroy the thrust. He then put on an air screw. That was the beginning. But my father could see that although it was a way of getting up rivers, it was a bit of nonsense, really.
Far from satisfactory, Bill was contemplating the next step when fate would have his boat builder offer a possible solution.
It was Arnold France who showed him a Popular Mechanics article. And the Popular Mechanics showed the Hanley jet. He didn't need a copy of it, but it gave the layout. So he then asked me to actually do the design of a jet unit.
For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Throw the water backwards and the boat itself will react or move in the other direction. Exactly the same as a jet aircraft, except they use air and water jet boats use water.
1953 saw Bill Hamilton's first attempt at jet propulsion, based on the Hanley Hydrojet. It was a centrifugal bevel gear-driven pump fitted into a second-hand 3.5-metre plywood hull with a Ford 10 engine.
That first jet unit was built at Irishman Creek, just fabricated out of mild steel, but it had bevel gears in it. The bevel gears were spare parts, which we bought from International Harvester, and the little jet unit worked well.
A tradesman, originally employed by the boss as a farmhand, was intrigued by his employer's eccentricities at Irishman. He watched the early tests that showed so much promise.
All these had the nozzle under the boat, and they all turned 360 degrees, and I think went at a walking pace. Well, the ones that we had did.
But a protrusion under the hull didn't fit with the thinking of traversing shallow water. And with the nozzle in front of the intake, hardly better than walking speed could be accomplished. To be successful, the answer was eject the jet stream through the transom.
In any case, the Hanley Hydrojet as it was originally the layout was changed to a nozzle straight out the back with a pair of steering deflectors to direct the jet stream left or right for steering, and that was a major breakthrough.
It doubled the speed, exactly doubled the speed. The boss said 9 miles an hour, but I think it was a fast walking space, which isn't it roughly, and by putting it through the transom, it went to 18 miles an hour.
The improvement was quite a bit, which allowed the boat to get up and plane, and suddenly there was a useful little boat. However, nobody at that stage saw commercial use.
The Christchurch operation occupied all the company's resources, but Bill's waterjet project needed help. So in 1954, a young Canterbury University engineering graduate was employed to help the boss down at Irishman Creek. Little did George Davison know how much influence this decision would have on his life.
I didn't know what a jet unit was, had no idea. I had to learn, so I did. And my first job was to draw up a production version of what we called the Quinnet. But it had its shortcomings. It wasn't over efficient. It worked, but it was very noisy. The gears and the casing were not the best.
And I think there was only 6 of them made, and they were awfully noisy, awfully noisy.
Yes, it certainly was noisy. It was nice to think of and try how to get rid of that noise.
This led George to design the Rainbow, another centrifugal pump, but this time with a direct drive making the noisy gearbox redundant. It was another step forward, and about 100 Rainbow jets were built.
That was the unit which really got it going in New Zealand, got people into riverboating without spending too much money.
I was very thrilled because it had the same performance really as the Quinnet, and it was completely free of noise.
The prototype Rainbow unit is still in the original hull Alf Dick fitted it to in 1956. These days it gathers dust in the farm shed of former world river racing champion John Heslop, who bought it from a fisherman just down the road.
It wasn't till after that I found out the history of it, that Alf Dick had designed the boat and put it together and done quite a bit of boating, and I'd probably read about it in the paper as well, but I thought after that we should hang on to it.
I actually built the boat. I sort of lengthened it a bit and made it a wee bit wider and powered it with a 100E prefect. That's the first rainbow. It was designed by George Davison. It was the first of the batch. The boat did actually 22 miles an hour. It was a big success. It went very well.
Back at Irishman Creek, George wanted to improve on the centrifugal pump. His next design later in 1956, an axial flow water jet. A more efficient type of pump had provided the performance breakthrough that would see Hamilton Jet take on the world.
I thought about it a fair bit and decided an axial flow pump was the way to go. It handled more water. The water didn't have to go through so many bends, went more or less up and straight through the unit out the back. Less water losses, frictional losses, and bigger flow for more propulsive efficiency. So that was called the Chinook and was a 2 impellers axial flow pump.
And it was at that stage it was good enough to attract licensees overseas.
I was sitting in my little office at Irishman Creek writing letters to everywhere in the world, answering inquiries. What was this jet boat? And then things started to happen. Peeler Corporation, they were building jet boats at that stage, and from de Havilland, Australia. At about the same time they were coming on stream in England, and by the Doughty Group in Canada, boats out of Ajax, Ontario. So the world was becoming aware that there was something around.
Not unexpectedly, another Kiwi, Arnold France, began working on a similar concept around the same time. Bill Hamilton had had numerous conversations with France and his son-in-law Frank Henderson about the idea, and interest was sparked. Henderson, a lecturer in hydraulics at the University of Canterbury, helped France design an axial flow jet and install it in a 4-metre boat with a Ford 10 engine. Performance was good, but business pressures forced France to eventually drop the development.
Without the sort of intimate knowledge and the enthusiasm for the sport itself, it really didn't go very far.
It's all very well developing an innovative product, but if you want to commercialise it, you've got to have a market.
Ironically, George Davison had taken lectures under Frank Henderson as a student of engineering at the University of Canterbury.
There was no mention of water jet units at that time, but we did pump design and all sorts of things involved with hydraulics. Frank Henderson's wife was a daughter of Arnold France, and Arnold France was the man who showed Bill Hamilton this Hanley Hydrojet drawing out of a Popular Mechanics magazine that got him going on water jets. With Bill Hamilton's drive and the resources, we could do something, which was probably what a lot of other people were unable to do.
And that's, of course, the genius of an inventor who doesn't look at the half-empty glass, looks at the half-full glass, and says, for example, as Edison one time is quoted as having said, "Well, I didn't fail, I just learned another way not to build it."
By his enthusiasm running into rivers, he slowly got around him a whole team of jet boating people keen on getting out into the outbacks, boating the shallow rivers.
It was 1954 when young photographer Guy Mannering was approached by Bill Hamilton to photograph his jet boat in action on the Waimakariri River, just outside Christchurch.
Guy was asked by Hamilton's to go and photograph his boat, which was rather precious to Bill at that stage. It was a cold day, it was wet, it was miserable, and he wasn't fearfully enthusiastic.
Mannering was later commissioned to photograph a new boat with a better jet. This time, like the weather, things were looking brighter.
The second time he went was with Bill and Alf Dick, and there were the two boats. It was exciting, exhilarating, and he came home on cloud 9. That was his first experience of a really happy day in the boats.
His story and pictures were published in the Weekly News in January 1957 and created a surge of interest in the new craft.
Where I saw this wonderful spread in the middle of the magazine, which Guy Mannering had photographed. I could see boats in the context of a beautiful river gorge. It just was something we'd never seen. So that, more than anything, got me hooked on the concept of going up a river in a powered boat.
The wave was gathering momentum, and on it was Guy Mannering himself. The photographer was so impressed, he bought the second Rainbow unit off the production line.
Because Guy is an impulsive man, he had to have a boat, of course. So that's what he did. He went and bought a boat.
The possibility that this afforded of getting into new and backcountry places in particular, which we'd never seen. So the early days of jet boating was very much one of exploration.
There'd be nothing to see 25 to 50 deer and 1,000 Canada geese as I'd go through the gorge.
There was a wonderful group of core jet boaters. There was Alf Dick, there was George Davison, Guy's brother John, Duke Dixon, who was a great friend of Guy's, and of course Bill always went along. They were joining. Everybody was wanting to be on the fun too. It was great fun.
To be able to get paid for having fun in boats is pretty hard to beat. So really, I just enjoyed life.
Guy really, really admired and worshipped Bill Hamilton. I think we all did. He was the boss. And so it was a great father figure for Guy. It really was, because Guy had lost his father years before.
For the next couple of years, this merry band of enthusiasts followed Bill Hamilton up and down as many New Zealand rivers as they could find, spawning the sport of jet boating as we know it today. The picture of Guy Mannering's contribution is not limited to his photography. The plywood hulls of the era were taking a terrible beating on the shallow rivers.
I remember one occasion when Guy very much wanted to go out on the Sunday, and the boat had to be mended on that Saturday night, and he brought the boat into our living room and mended the bottom so that he had some light, because our garage didn't have any light.
Guy grasps a new product, fiberglass, as the perfect solution to patching the myriad of holes appearing in the bottom of his boat. Bill Hamilton was so impressed he adopted the medium immediately, not just as a quick fix for the fragile plywood, but for the construction of the hulls themselves.
Guy Mannering met this bloke. He was a Czechoslovakian chemist, and he actually brought along samples of fiberglass. And we tried to destroy these with a hammer, and we were amazed at the strength of them. And it was really Guy who introduced us to Charles Cox.
And Charles knew all about fiberglass. And Guy experimented with Charles on fiberglass hulls. And it was magic. It really did work.
It was so new that he didn't go as far as the deck or the sides, but it had a fiberglass bottom. I would think that amongst the jet boating fraternity, at least, Bill Hamilton would be considered rather similar to Henry Ford in what he did with the motorcar.
If Bill Hamilton is to the jet boat what Henry Ford is to the motorcar, then this is Hamilton's Model T. The Jet 30 Mark I established itself as Hamilton's first true production assembled jet boat. Building commenced in 1960, and by the time production ceased in 1969, almost 200 boats had been sold throughout the country.
We had the Chinook jet, which was the first really serious production axial flow unit. It was up and running, but it was expensive. It cost £250 from memory, and that was quite a lot of money in those days. And we felt the market was being restricted because of cost.
By 1964, the boats were fitted with the new Colorado series water jets.
I went down to Irishman Creek from Christchurch and spent some weeks designing a cheaper, simpler jet unit. And that turned out to be called the Colorado Junior. It was half the price of a Chinook. It had a single impeller, the simple ones. Later models had 2 and 3 impellers. So the Colorado series came into being in the early 60s and really We took a step up in sales, and the Colorado sold freely.
At 4 metres in length, with an 8-degree V bottom, it was ideal for slow, shallow water boating. The Jet 30 had an enviable reputation as being one of the best riverboats ever. Bill's visionary mind again played a big part in the next stage of the jet boat. In his eyes, this popular movement needed organisation.
Bill's interest in it was not so much from the sort of the club outing racing sort of dimension which abounds today, but purely in the ability to get up new rivers. He was also very keen to see it properly organised.
Guy lived for jet boats, absolutely lived for jet boats. Any news, any new development, any new stories, and the phones would go at night with more lovely stories coming across, and they would join up every weekend and try again to do another run.
We had a 15-boat party up the Wire. We had a chat under the willow trees at lunchtime, and I think a number of us were appointed from that group to have an informal committee meeting to decide on where we went next.
It was greeted with enthusiasm by my father. Thought what a good idea. And after that there were much more formal meetings and rallies.
The first meeting we had following that was right here in this room, just virtually where this piano is here. This was not the association as yet, but it's the precursor to it. The actual formal formation of the association was held in the Pioneer Sports Club rooms in Christchurch on the 11th of December 1962. So that was the actual start of the Jet Boat Association, the New Zealand Jet Boat Association. The patron of the association was Bill Hamilton. John Hamilton was the vice president, George Davison, Richard Johnson, Don Malcolm, Guy Mannering, John Mannering, his brother, Jock Montgomery, Alan Watson, and myself. Because I'd poked my head above the gunwale, I became the chairman or the first president.
The Jet Boat Association has had a very good effect in two ways. First of all, to do with river boating, they were able to negotiate with the government agencies which control the rivers.
Guy was the leader of the boaters to, in effect, try to reach some kind of compromise with the regulators about how the boating activity was going to be guided and governed.
He was a good spokesman for the Jet Boat Association. He was most articulate, and I think he did a great deal of good.
As people have taken up jet boating overseas, they've got a New Zealand example, not to guide them, to at least encourage them.
In the late 50s, word was reaching overseas, especially North America, about boats capable of navigating rivers previously thought unboatable.
My friend Bill Austin and I were in Christchurch on our way to Antarctica to spend the Antarctic summer on the Ross Ice Shelf.
Many Americans used to come either to his studio or to our house and ask questions of photography down in Antarctica.
Bill, as a photographer, was in search of some information and happened into Guy's place on Cashel Street, where they immediately hit it off. And then Bill came back and said, I met this fantastic gentleman, and he thinks we should make a river trip this weekend. So 3 or 4 days later, we found ourselves on the Waimak. That was the beginning of our association with the jet boat.
And these two gentlemen became our firm friends. Bill, of course, finally invited us to go to the Colorado, and so he was the opening pin for the Colorado expedition.
He made this proposal of running the Colorado upstream. My father went over there, and with Bill, they explored the bottom end of the canyon.
Bill Hamilton was convinced it was possible. In conjunction with Hamilton Jets USA licensee John Beeler, the plan was laid for a return the following year to conquer a river never before boated upstream, What better way to demonstrate the capability of this new propulsion system? Today, more than 16,000 people float the Colorado every year between Lee's Ferry and Lake Mead. But in 1960, a total of less than 400 people had ever been down through the canyon, and none had successfully boated against the flow. For Bill, this was his ultimate challenge, but an accident on the Matukituki River over summer put paid to his assault on the Colorado.
The boss previously had broken his elbow in a boating accident, and it was a very bad break. And I'm so sorry he wasn't with us.
Guy Mannering, his wife, myself and Joyce, we went over and experienced this really wonderful adventure.
The plan was to first boat downstream, laying in fuel dumps for the return attempt.
We didn't have any handholds. We just had ropes across that we had to hold on to as we went through the rapid. It was no support at all. So we just tumbled and crashed as we went through.
Progressively, the rapids got larger and larger till they peaked at Vulcan.
Guy had given me the camera. We were all very apprehensive of that roaring monster. And the first boat that took off was Bill Austin driving. I was filming it, and I saw the boat just soar through the air and then with this great crash land down into the hole underneath. And I saw Bill lying on the deck, and was obviously his leg was broken because he was having to hold it together. And that was a terrible, terrible time. And that night that followed until a helicopter came down to pick him up.
Joyce Hamilton's account of the trip in her book, Whitewater, leaves little doubt about the difficulty and danger of this trip, especially at Vulcan.
Well, Vicky and I sat here for 2 days watching the boats fighting their way up the rapid. And we were sitting on the edge, and there was the river, 3,000 feet below. Waiting, and they tried, and they tried. Last, the boat gets up over the top. Tremendous excitement, but not knowing who was driving it, who was in the boat.
We had many other hurdles. Many other rapids were difficult. Horton Creek, further up, was in bad condition and very difficult. But we didn't really have too much difficulty in the navigation of the rapids until we got up to Grapevine, a big rapid in which we sunk one of the boats.
But it was quite a trip. It was a success. 3 boats made it all the way up to Lee's Ferry and arrived in early July, so it was about 1 month altogether.
I'm sure, guys, the most precious moment would have been the Colorado. To be in the Colorado with John and Joyce and Bill and Phil was very special.
I don't think people would appreciate how difficult it was unless they were boaters who had tried boating in whitewater.
Magnificent to be back here and see the country again.
Yeah, but that's you, huh?
That's me.
1960. Would you autograph my river guide?
I'll do that.
Great. It was really good to meet you.
See you another trip.
We will. Eventually it comes up on almost every trip. Has anybody run a boat up this river? And I can say, yeah, a guy named John Hamilton did back in 1960. He's the only one that's ever done it. What an honor.
44 years later, at Lake Powell, just outside Page in Arizona, one of Glen Canyon Recreation Area's greatest mysteries is finally put to rest for archaeologist Chris Kincaid.
So that will be reread. None of us have a memory of how the boat managed to get here.
How we got it, huh?
Yeah. Well, that's the jet unit, all right.
Did you actually produce the hull of the boat or just the engine?
We gave the license to manufacture the jet units to the Beeler Corporation.
And so, as word spread about these tiny boats from New Zealand conquering the mighty Colorado, life at Hamilton's would never be the same.
The whole Colorado expedition, I'm sure, gave jet boats impetus. I'm sure it lifted it up out of just a toy to a great invention. I really think that lifted it all completely. Changed it completely, really.
For the next 20 years, a group of enthusiasts would find themselves involved in some of the most exciting boating adventures in some of the most unusual places in the world. Places like Papua New Guinea, where the Australian government funded a geological expedition on the Sepik River. The Congo, helping the British military commemorate Stanley's 1875 journey down the Zaire River. And the Mekong in Thailand. Back home, another famous New Zealander, Edmund Hillary, still high from conquering Mount Everest, was looking to new challenges and adventures.
I'd become quite interested in jet boating myself then. I did some trips with John Hamilton. Then the idea struck me that it would be very nice to bring a couple of jet boats over to India.
The first expedition was into Nepal. That was in 1968. The first uprun up the Sunkosi River.
We did some trial runs up big rivers that ran into the Sunkosi. We drove up the Aran, which was a pretty difficult river. It was very steep, lots of rapids.
Aran was very bad. I thought that was a very bad place altogether.
And the water got worse and worse, and we just felt at some stage
it must get better.
It must get better, yeah, but it never did.
The thing was, look, it had got better until that moment when I turned round and I saw the jet boat with its tail in the air.
And you called out, it's sinking, it's sinking. I can remember that very clearly.
Jim actually managed to sink his boat.
And then we had to reorganise and do the upring run with only a single boat.
We headed up the wild waters on the Sunkosi. We had to overcome a lot of rapids. Finally, we reached our ultimate destination, which was the track leading into Kathmandu. We started out with 2 boats, but we ended up with 1. But we did succeed in overcoming the problems on the river with the 1 boat.
Then Ed Hillary was so delighted with that trip that he decided that he would do what became the Ocean to Sky trip, the full length of the Ganges.
Trip up Mother Ganges, or Ganga as we called it, appealed to me as being a very interesting and energetic challenge. It was about 1,500 miles from the ocean where we commenced, up the river to as far as we could go in the Himalayas itself. It was one of the most fantastic trips I have personally ever done.
A typical day we'd run for 3, 4 or 5 hours up the huge river with great sailboats plying up and down the river. Absolutely amazing. We didn't see motorised craft at all. Then about the middle of the day we'd get into a fuel dump, and there we'd met with thousands of people coming to see Ed.
They really felt that we were making a religious pilgrimage, because many Indians believe that in their lifetime they should try and travel all the way up the Ganges from the ocean up into the Himalayas, and that was obviously what we were doing.
Ed was busy signing little bits of paper for people, having his pictures taken for the newspaper. Then we'd set up again and we'd have another 3, 4, 5 hours run up the river. As we got up further, the river got more and more confined and faster. It could be driven up without too much problem until Hardwire, and then after that we got some real tough rapids. You know, great big waves, much narrower river. And that was wonderful. We had spent a week up the Alacananda, and then to my, I perhaps should say relief, we came to a waterfall.
We went as far as we could go. It was a big waterfall there, and above that were vast rocks that were impossible for us, so we had to leave our jet boats there, and we walked the last 100 miles up into the mountain. The challenges that the jet boat puts before you if you wish to do a difficult trip, I think are very similar to the challenges you have in a mountain. We certainly found this in all our challenges in the Himalaya.
The effect of these expeditions on CWF Hamilton and the business of water jet manufacture is hard to quantify. But one thing is certain. The Hamilton jet was not hard to market.
I think in those days, certainly from my perspective in the publicity arena, it was seen as just the easiest publicity job in the world because it attracted so much attention.
The commercial potential of the jet boat as a tourist adventure tool was a direct spin-off. Today, hundreds of jet boat operations around the world have treated millions of people to the thrills of skimming over ankle-deep water or perilously close to rock walls.
Boating up rivers was a hugely exciting step for all of us, so much so that I turned to commercial boating and doing a trip through the Waimak Gorge. It changed the direction of my life hugely.
Barely 5 years after the release of a viable production model, Harold and Ellen Melhop from Invercargill began taking Queenstown holidaymakers on jet boat rides on the Kawerau River.
They started doing it on Frankton Beach here at 5 shillings a ride, and then the council encouraged the Melhop brothers to go into Queenstown Bay and operate from the main pier, which is where we operate from now.
The shot-over operation was split off and purchased by Herb Palmer, the local harbour master, in 1966, and later by Trevor Gamble.
When we first started, it was straight down through the centre, stop, turn round, and it was a very quiet, scenic trip. I sometimes say designed for the aged and infirm, but after I'd been driving for about 3 years, I used to go right in against the rocks. If they were older, I respected their age. We had a 73-year-old. I took off down the river, missed everything by at least 3 feet, and before I started talking, she did. Last year she'd been down, and last year was much more thrilling, and this year she'd brought her husband down, and she wasn't getting her money's worth. So I had to upgrade the trip just to stop the old girl from complaining. And that night at home, we sat down and we decided, right, we saw it as a thrill trip, and from now on, we'll just go as close as possible to the rocks and make it as thrilling as we possibly can. That was the turning point of the trip. That was probably the birth of the adventure tourism in Queenstown. Well, we started off, of course, with a single stage. This is back in 1970. Then we went to a 2-stage. Then we went to a 3-stage. And then when we got the big boats, which they had designed and built the 1031.
The company had been developing heavier jet units, the 1031, bigger diameter, bigger flow, and these were going. So we adapted these new units, the 1031, to work in the shot-over boats.
They were quite different to your conventional boat. There was a couple of tight bits in the river that you needed a short boat to get round, but it was under 16 feet, but 8'4" wide. So it was quite unconventional At that time, Hamilton's did the fit out and supplied the unit, etc. And they made us sign a disclaimer that they weren't responsible because they really didn't think the boat would float or work.
We didn't really know what to do with them and were a little bit frightened about them. They were about as wide as they were long, and the designs were very unconventional. The normal ratio of length to beam was gone. This thing, you weren't sure which side was the front. They were almost square, and they were boat designs that really were too unusual for us.
Today, the original operation, Kawaro Jet, has taken the tourist attraction to even greater heights in specially designed large-capacity twin-engine jet boats using Hamilton's high-volume 212 water jets. Twin-engine tourist boats are nothing new. Rangi Jet on the Wanganui first hit the water in the early 60s, and Duke Dixon plied the Waimakariri Gorge around the same time, also with a twin-engine version of his original boat. But this operation almost defies belief. 4 tons of boat and passengers skimming across just 100 millimetres of water at 30 knots.
In 1995, we produced the twin-engine 23-seater jet boat. The safety was one of the main reasons we went for it. With single-engine craft, if the engine fails, then you've got no steerage. Twin-engine, it's very, very unlikely that both engines will stop at the same time. So for safety with the twin engines, 23 passengers and up the very, very shallow braided narrow channels of the Shotover, it set new standards for the industry. The jet boat has really started off adventure tourism in Queenstown in 1960 with the Malhop brothers. That was really the first adventure activity for people to do. It's produced huge results for the town. It's marketed worldwide. The jet boating being unique to Queenstown and to New Zealand, being a New Zealand invention.
Good afternoon, everybody. How are we doing?
By the 1970s, Hamilton Jet was producing a wide range of river and inshore seagoing jet boats, from the 4-metre Jet 20s to the luxury 7-metre cabin boat. All used the Colorado and later the better designed 750 and 770 series units.
It was mounted over a single hole in the hull of the boat and eased the mounting for manufacturers. It was simpler to mount and had much more outboard of the boat, more sticking out the back, if you like.
To counter inefficiency myths about jet propulsion in the ocean, a television campaign was launched using the famous slogan,
"Born in the rivers, to play in the sea."
The Born in the Rivers to Play in the Sea campaign, which was pretty much aimed at the deep water market out of Auckland, threw the Hamilton company into a whole new light, really, as far as the New Zealand market was concerned.
It was important in the marketplace to show that the jet boat worked adequately and efficiently in seagoing conditions.
And we had a thriving boat building business here until building boats in Christchurch for the New Zealand market.
While the fuel crisis and the luxury tax of the late 70s seriously reduced demand for jet boats, Hamilton's core business was still heavy engineering. But all that came to a crashing halt in the 80s after a change of the government's think big policies of the era and the lifting of import protection.
You know, we as a company had thrived on the back of the think big projects of the day.
Really quite rapidly, work fell off. All the big work was imported from overseas instead of being built in New Zealand, and we had some very difficult decisions to make.
Suddenly that work was just evaporating, and the company was actually faced with survival issues which it had never been faced with in its history to date.
We had at one stage over 500 people operating on heavy engineering, but we realised we had to reduce the size of the company.
It was a heavy load on his shoulders to keep this company going, so there was definitely misgivings.
The proposition that was put in front of the company was focus on the water jet, one product, rather than the multiple products that we had.
The company had to think about its future and decided to go for the product that they had a market for, the water jet units, and try and develop it into something more.
Part of the marketing effort was to set up a distribution network around the world, a network of independent distributors.
Anyway, the decision was made. One product, sell it around the world, water jets. So we went for it. And I'm pleased to say it worked.
Hamilton Jet's own regional offices in Europe and USA supply directly to larger clients where specific tailored application is required. Typically, this might involve setting up multiple water jets in one boat with sophisticated electronic control systems.
So if you start putting 3, 4, and as we have done 5 water jets along the transom of a vessel, the control aspects get awfully complicated until you're able to control them with electronics. So that has been one of the more recent developments within the company, is to bring in electrical or electronic engineers was a big innovation and necessary for us to go forward.
Today, Hamiltons produce a wide range of water jets. The smallest model, the 212, considered by Hamiltons as their freshwater jet, is most likely found in the large rivers of the Pacific Northwest region of America, servicing the pleasure market. The remaining range, up to 800 millimetres in diameter, is used in applications as diverse as crew boats working in the Gulf of Mexico to fast passenger ferries in New York.
The typical crew boat will carry perhaps 200 or 300 tonnes of machinery, but when it's not doing that, it spends the rest of its time taking crews. But for these boats, you have to handle a lot of water, which means a very large diameter nozzle. They overcome this by putting in 4 and sometimes 5 of our jet units.
Dozens of water jet boats service the massive population moving to and from Manhattan Island every day. Combinations of single and multiple jet-powered boats ply the Hudson River with ease of manoeuvrability and without the worry of large quantities of floating debris damaging props and rudders.
All the way, Captain!
More than 10 times the size of Bill Hamilton's first jet boat, the Circle Line Zephyr represents one of the biggest passenger jet applications from the Hamilton stable. 4 half-metre water jets propel the 44-metre tourist catamaran around New York Harbour, carrying 600 people at speeds up to 30 knots. History will show Hamilton's deliberate path into commercial water jets proved astute for the ongoing viability of the company. But nonetheless, many frustrated jet boaters looking for speed watched on as the Americans came up with their answer to the Hamilton jet.
It's a mixed flow. It's halfway between a centrifugal pump and an axial flow pump that we at Hamilton's used. So I think Berkeley were able to capture a market, particularly in the States and later in other parts of the world, that wanted to go fast with big engines, and it did that very efficiently. It still does. Hamilton's knew about this. They were able to build high-pressure jet units of a similar ilk, but commercially they decided to head more for the heavy-duty commercial propulsion units of big flow, medium pressure.
Despite this decision, Hamilton jets had already competed with distinction in early powerboat racing.
Well, this one here is Jetmark. This was built 1970. It was, I think, 21 foot long. It was actually, I designed it, but it was actually a copy of Don Shedd. Don Shedd actually made the cigarette hulls in England, and he used to make 40, 60 foot long ones, but this one here was 21 feet, I think she was. She actually did 72 miles an hour, which was very fast in those days.
As pleasure turned to competition, jet boat marathon racing on rivers was born. It was 1970 when the first 3-day marathon was held in the North Island, and so began a Kiwi phenomenon. By 1972, expat Mike Sanderman, living in Canada, had won the Rio Bolsas River Race in Mexico for the first time in a Hamilton-powered jet boat. Bill Hamilton's interest in racing jet boats was hardly surprising. Racing was in his blood.
I think he was the first man to do 109 miles an hour in a car, in a racing car in New Zealand. You know, he was always a keen racer, and he supported the racing very well.
He brought out from England a 1914 Sunbeam racing car, some 5 or maybe 7 had been built, and that was it. It had never quite done 100 miles an hour, but I brought it up here to Irishman Creek and stripped it down, overhauled the engine, put a new body on it, and went motor racing.
Bill Hamilton also travelled to England, bought a Bentley, hotted up the engine at the Bentley factory, and went racing at Brooklands.
It's the Easter race in 1930 against some quite severe competition. He was able to win all 3 races.
No one had ever won all 3 races before Hamilton, and no one has since. So for John, the Hamilton jet assault on the 1973 Rio Bolsas in Mexico was uncharted territory. But by now, like his father, he was becoming accustomed to unusual challenges. Hamilton Jet 1, a Jet 52 with 454 Chevrolet and 3-stage racing jet, was the official company entry driven by John. The race was won by Hamilton Jet 2, an identical boat driven by Neville Sutherland. In an ironic twist, John's prize for 3rd place was a brand new outboard motor.
Hamilton is a great pump. I know that in '75 in Mexico, Hamilton was still the #1, but the Berkeleys were closing in, but the technology has changed. And at the speeds they're running now, it's a lower pressure pump. Doesn't have the velocity to keep up.
Brian Clement, working on the banks of the Red Deer River in Alberta, Canada, remembers hearing about the jet and built one without even trying it.
I never rode in a jet boat or seen one operate till I built my first jet boat in 1966. And Fred Kroenig was working for me. And I had an idea about running the river because my shop happened to be sitting on the river and we kept looking at the river. And I took a lot of people on their first jet boat ride who are very involved in jet boating today on this river.
To me, that's a camaraderie with the New Zealanders and the Americans and Mexicans, all of them together. But we have, I think, a special relationship with the Kiwis since the beginning there. We all seem to be on the same page.
This common interest in racing jet boats would be a bond for life.
Well, as far as the Hamilton was concerned, I think it was a pretty good jet unit and whatnot, and they had lots of power in front of it. I don't know if they were a lot faster than us, but they certainly had their race game together better than we did.
John Heslop, the quietly spoken farmer from Southbridge just outside Christchurch, already had the 1977 New Zealand Marathon title in the bag when he shipped Union Travel Jet into North America to take on the high horsepower Canadians and their Berkeleys. His rival, fierce competitor Fred Kroenig, couldn't match the talented Kiwi, and Heslop picked up his 2nd major title in 2 countries.
Freddie Kroenig and I would argue for hours over the pros and cons, and finally after a few years Freddie convinced me that the Berkeley was better, to get more speed anyway.
It's a low flow, high pressure pump, and it's efficient, and it drives boats very fast.
The inaugural World Championship in Canada eluded both Heslop and Kroenig in 1978, but the Kiwi snatched the 1979 World Crown in decisive style in Mexico to become the only competitor to ever achieve wins in each competing country, a record that stood for 25 years. On rotation, New Zealand hosted the 1980 Worlds, a huge affair with a record field of fast, competitive boats. Amongst them, the reigning and undisputed world champion, John Heslop, and the first overseas competitor to challenge the Kiwis on home waters, all the way from Las Vegas, Nevada.
We thought we were pretty good. We were naive and we didn't know what we were up against. We obviously, as I said before, we were completely outclassed on our abilities, on our skills. And I had only been on rivers with dirty water, so I was used to reading the river based on color of water as well as texture, and et cetera. When I went to New Zealand, obviously the rivers were braided, which we aren't used to braided over here. Nothing on that scale, at least. And then being able to see the bottom while I was racing completely disoriented me. I was like I had never been in a jet boat before or on a river before when I got there. So it was quite an experience.
1980 was never destined to be the Americans' year, nor that of the world champion Heslop. A young protege from the same region was about to make his foray into the world of jet boat marathon racing. 26-year-old Mark Cromie from Rakaya built his own Alloy Jet 73. Powering the three-stage Hamilton race unit was the popular twin-turbo 454 Chev prepared in his father's garage.
Working in a country garage, all my spare time that I spent on my race boat. Well, we were certainly very, very new in that game because it was the first real big marathon we'd ever been in. It wasn't easy, you know, because we had no real experience in boating and we had to learn how to do this and how to read rivers. And I think what we used to do is just follow people, and it was easy just to sit back and follow them and watch how they worked. And of course, eventually there was no one to follow.
25 years later, Cromie is one of the best-known names in jet boat racing with 3 world crowns to his name. But even he can't boast a crown in each country.
John Heslop was the man of jet boating around the world. He was a hero, and I think he was well respected over in America and Canada and certainly in Mexico.
John Heslop's memories of his racing days overseas are never far away. His flagship Union Travel jet, unceremoniously dumped in the front yard, a constant reminder of his competitive past. A past that forged a few friendships.
Most of them were forged, but mostly over a bottle of Canadian rum. Yeah, met a lot of friends, mainly talking boats, and just carried on from there.
Sadly, John succumbed to cancer before this story could be told. But Fred Kroenik's son Rob, himself a 2-times world jet boat champion, knows all too well the important contribution John Heslop has made to jet boating.
Other than the bottom.
He's actually cleaned it up for this.
See, Robbie, here's one of the bits.
Is this the original wheel?
Yep.
Well, basically, now that we've got that, we can easily rebuild the rest of it.
As a tribute to his father and his friend John, Kroenik Jr. has undertaken to restore Union Travel Jet to her former glory as one of the few remaining champion marathon race boats of that era.
And what the hell have you got there, John? That's not 73.
Well, you should know what it is.
And what of that other important piece of history tucked away in John's farm shed?
So we haven't got time to talk about it now, we've got something else to do in here.
Now, what the hell was
John Heslop and Elf Dick share a tipple of an almost forgotten bottle of whiskey, pledged more than 25 years ago, to celebrate one of the oldest jet boats in existence, safe in the knowledge Elf's original old boat will now be preserved in its current state by the Canterbury Museum, ensuring future generations can stay in touch with this uniquely New Zealand concept.
I would have to say that we early boaters in Canterbury were exceedingly privileged to have been born at this time, because we were witness to the development of the whole boat. We were fortunate enough to know personally the key people involved. We were just lucky to have been there at the start when rivers had not been explored. We were just very fortunate individuals.
From the back blocks of New Zealand's South Island, where the objective to boat against the flow of the river was first spawned, the Hamilton Jet has made a remarkable journey across time and the globe.
It's never going to be 90% of marine propulsion, but the world is a big place, and the niche market for jets is really quite substantial.
One man's vision has seen CWF Hamilton evolve from a once successful heavy engineering company into a progressive world leader in water jet propulsion manufacture.
Bill Hamilton would have been delighted that one day the company would just survive on this one product that he had such an interest in and obviously was the forefather of.
So the Zephyr powers around the icon of the 21st century, with those aboard oblivious to the humble beginnings of the propulsion system that removed the need for the propeller. A propulsion system that opened up the waterways of the world and the minds of those who challenged them.
Well, when my father was running up small rivers in New Zealand, I'm sure he would never have dreamed that his jet propulsion would be used to visit the Statue of Liberty in New York.